It's Nono here from the Neuron team, and this is just a quick demo on some progress on the Electron template that we're creating to build our own prototypes. This Electron template so far is a simplification or a cleanup of the work that we've been doing in the Black team for Refinery, and it's basically getting all the initial setup and try to get running with a working app as fast as possible. So you can see I created a fork to the Neuron repository, and in the Electron template folder, you can see the boilerplate of Electron is an empty Electron app with a lot of setup that we can start using already. So what I wanted to show or explain today is what does this application have already. So we have an Electron app that was kind of the initial premise, and I've added the TypeScript compiler and also an entry point for a React application, and also a workflow to compile the assets with webpack. So what does this mean? I'm gonna show quickly how this works. So if I have the directory here with all the project, and before I explain anything, I'm just gonna run npm start. What this is doing right now is compiling or building the application in development mode for me to be able to try it here. And it's doing it using webpack. As you can see, this webpack electron config.js file that has all the configuration for what's called a webpack target. What you can see here is the application that I've coded, that right now I haven't really shown anything, but it's just an application that you can write some text, and that state is saved into the application and then used somewhere else. And also here a really dumb markdown parser. So the purpose of this is that Electron is going to allow us to build standalone applications that we can, maybe using HTTP or WebSocket protocols, we can integrate directly with Revit, but we can also have some functionality standalone. And what's important here is that off the shelf, right, by just using this template, we're getting a lot of things. We're building with Webpack, we're building for Electron and also web targets, which means that this application can not only run in Electron, but I can also do run the npm run live command that we've set up to run this application on the browser, and it will be able to work as a web app without using the backend Node.js process that is contained in Electron. So reducing the capabilities to interact with the operating system, but being able to do everything that involves the web app. You can see here I'm running inside of Google Chrome, and I can do exactly the same things that I was doing before. Okay, what else is there? So as I said, we're building with Webpack, which means that we have a build command that is using a Webpack config file that knows everything that has to be used in order to compile TypeScript into JavaScript, and also do a lot of things like processing JSON files, SCSS files for style sheets, and more. Webpack is a bit, I don't know, it's a bit complicated to understand at first, but everything you have is a webpack.config file, right? Where you establish the entry points or the scripts that your application is going to enter through, and then you have to set a set of models that are loaders that know how to load different types of files. For example, Awesome TypeScript Loader knows how to load TypeScript files and compile them into JavaScript. And then there are some Sass or CSS style loaders, SVG inline loaders, and some others. That some of the stuff that was in the previous application I tried to remove, but there might be some stuff that we still have to remove. And then what's important to note, one thing that I wanted to mention is that Webpack works with targets, right? It will build your application differently if you build for Electron or just for plain Node.js, or if you build for the web. The easiest example is that if we, and this is what it means, so we have a target web, and this config plus the common config that is up here is what will be built for running on the browser on Chrome. What that does is, for example, this target web that happened when I did npm run dev, or in the case of this application, when I run npm run web dev or webprof, you can see we're using the webpack.config.js and not the webpack.electron.config.js file. So what happens when we call one of these commands that compile or build the web target, what we're seeing is that it generates what is called web assets, distributions for the web. So let me just run npm run web dev, and what's happening here is that when I run the Electron command, it builds the distribution files in this dist folder, and now the web target is building them in the dist web folder. This is something that we've set up, but basically has an index.html file and an index.js file that are in your system. We can see them here. And if I were to create or run a web server in that directory, you can see that that's gonna run automatically. So this is the Electron application, and we can run it here on a live web server because this is compiled for the web. Instead, the distribution one, so if I were to do the same with the distribution folder that is actually built for Electron, this actually works, but we're not executing the main process. So this is a file that runs inside of Electron in the what's called the Electron main process, and it's a Node.js process that would allow us to interact with the operating system and with other APIs that Electron offers in every operating system. And here what we're running is just the index.html and index.js. You can see the other different Electron targets here in Webpack Electron config, where we have the same configuration on the top, but we have two different blocks with two different targets. One of them is target Electron main, and the other one is target Electron renderer. The differences here is that main.js, the file that runs on the main process, knows that it's for Electron main, which is similar to building for Node.js. And what it will do is that it will require the node models as Node.js does when running a script. But the Electron renderer or the web target actually embed the, let's say that it embeds or packs the dependencies on the JavaScript file, because it's thought to be bundled up and uploaded to a website or be run on a Chrome tab, like we saw before. So this is for how the inner workings are for Webpack, building with Webpack and using the Electron or web targets. And then I just wanted to show a bit of TypeScript and React with Redux and what that means. And of course, this is just like a 5 or 10 minute video, and it's not gonna be teaching you TypeScript or React with Redux, but it's just to see an overview of what they are. So when I'm talking about the React application, right, we have this source code folder where we have the main.ts file that is something that only lives in Electron. What we're doing is just normal Electron opening the window, setting the size of the window when it starts, and setting what happens when the window is ready and when it's closed. What we do is that we load the index.html file on the window that we open, And that would be the double process, right? We have this distribution folder that has the main file, that is this one, that runs on Node on Electron, and is that process, the main process, that then kickstarts a window and then opens this index.html with the index.js that contains our compiled TypeScript app that is basically a React application, and then converting to JavaScript. So if we leave this main process aside for a bit, everything else in this folder is the React application that is written on TypeScript. As you can see, the file names are main.ts and not .js. And tsx is a syntax that comes from the React DOM package, I believe, where you can use this sort of funky, what's called JSX syntax. It's a mix in between JavaScript and HTML, where you can write sort of structured HTML to create components, and then also mix in JavaScript. This is the entry point of a React application written in TypeScript, but it will look really similar in JavaScript. And what it's saying is that it should start a new app component that is defined in a different file here and mounted on the root component of the index file, right? The index file is built with this default.ejs template. And basically we will load this index, and then the application will mount itself in this root folder. What we can look at next is that this app component, once the application is loaded, would be expanded with these contents, right? The application component has a method that defines how it renders itself, and here is where we actually define everything that's shown on screen. If I go to this application, you can see how what I have written here is shown on the right. And one thing that I'll explain later is that we have ways to, instead of having, you see how I'm changing things here and this doesn't really change, there is a way where I can watch the application, and then the application will start, but also will be looking for changes and rebuilding when I edit files, and we're gonna see that now. So one more thing that I'm gonna show after I show this thing of automatic reload is how Redux is implemented here, or why is it implemented, and how can we use it. So when I save now, you see how those characters appear on screen and they automatically update. So I could do things like, I don't know, adding a style here, which I can change the background color of this, and that shows up there. So it's pretty cool environment to develop, because we have this application that is running, and every time you're changing code in any file or a CSS file or TypeScript file, you're gonna see the changes reflected here. And that is it wasn't really it's a bit challenging to do in Electron, but it seems like it's finally working, and also working on the environment of the web target. So let's look at the last thing I wanted to show is the developer tools and Redux. So Redux is a library or a store to save information or data that is being used in the application. One example, and I'm not going to go into detail on this because it's really long, is that you define the state of your application. So what variables your application wants to know about. Here I just added one variable that is called sample text, and its default value is hello empty app. And what you can see is that when I change it, these fields are updating. What's happening is that this text here in some ways being dispatched or uploaded to replace the state on Redux, and then these guys are listening for changes and then sort of subscribing to that. This is actually super useful because it allows you to dispatch information from one part of the React application to Redux, and they read it from anywhere else in the application. So you don't have to be passing state around. And also it allows us to save that Redux state and persist it throughout sessions. So users can load state and save it, or automatically just remember it on the cache. How's this implemented? And again, this is probably not that useful to see but just so you have it in mind, is that we're loading Redux and React Redux. And what we have to do is that we need to connect the application component to Redux. And there is a way to have methods on this application component to dispatch state with an action. So for example, an action would be on sample text change. We update the sample text with the new text that comes from this input on change, right? Like we have this input and we have an on change event, and we're handling the input change and then calling on sample text change with the text. What happens then is that state gets dispatched into Redux, and then the component is also mapping the variable in the Redux state into a prop, what we can use by using these props.sampleText. Any component, even though the app is dispatching it, any component on the whole application could read from that state and make use of it in some way. So what's more interesting and probably better to see right now is that how do we visualize how all that's working? If we go back to this Electron application, excuse me. So you can see that we've specified for Electron to load the developer tools of React and Redux. You can see them here. Let me expand this a bit. So the first one would be React. So it's really important to be able to inspect the application. You can here browse. Normally you would inspect a website with the HTML elements. So you can see all the HTML hierarchy and all the components and the elements that are being rendered on screen. But what's more interesting, because we're not defining a lot of these divs or a lot of these elements in our application. We're directly using a different sort of syntax where we can see it here simplified, right? We see that we have a provider that we put in, we have a connected app, we have the actual app with the initial sample text, and we have some other elements that we're rendering here. What's more important is that when I click here on the app, I can see the props on the right. I can see that it has a method that I can call that is called sample text change, and then a prop that is called sample text, that is Nono here. If I now change this, you can see that Redux is automatically updating here on the right all the time. That's actually going up to Redux and then going down to this application, but it's instantaneously synchronized on state. And it's not only changing here, but it's also changing in all of the places where that variable is appearing. So this is for React. So this is the React inspector. And you can even see, for example, that even though this text is in bold, we can see the raw markdown here that is being used by the React markdown component and how it's actually being rendered. If we go to the Redux tab, we can see all the changes that I've done in the application. I'm gonna restart it just so we start from scratch. What happens here on Redux is that we have access to the store and we have access to pausing the state and actually to going back and forth and seeing where the application, what state the application was in at each point. This is super useful to reproduce bugs or ways that people are using the application. If we click in state, we're gonna see that the state is really simple right now. We have here hello empty app. If I now write something new, so let's say I click the letter A, there is an update sample text action, and then our state is A. If we go to this action, we can see that the diff is that we went from having the state sample text from being hello empty app to A. And you're gonna see, you see more events when we click on more keys. I can go back and forth, and for example, let's see if I can do this. So if I jump to this state you can see how the application was on A, and I can jump between different states of the application and then reproduce what has been done by the user, even going probably to the beginning. I don't know if I can do that. But yeah, so important thing is that once the information that the user has written or has input or has interacted with is in the Redux store, any part of the React application can read it. So I don't know how exactly we're gonna build the application yet, but this is a really good starting point, I believe, for getting started with code, and probably use this as a template for the application that we're going to build, or maybe for each of the separate applications that we might need to prototype.